Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be talking about another episode from Season 1, The Literary Man. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. In The Literary Man, actor David Huddleston plays A.J. Covington, a roving writer in search of the big story. Now you might remember David because he played Sheriff Ep Bridges in The Homecoming. So it was wonderful to work with David again. We really enjoyed working with him on The Homecoming. And so to have him back in this phenomenal role, it was such a fabulous role and he played it so beautifully. Now David was not the only actor from The Homecoming to come back and do a segment of The Waltons. Cleavon Little, who played Reverend Hawthorne Dooley, also came back and did an episode of The Waltons. Such fun for us to have actors back that we had worked with before. Always enjoyed that. John Boy is completely enamored of AJ. I mean, to be someone who aspires to be a writer and then to have contact with an actual real-life writer after only ever having read books and heard about them. So to John Boy, this is a dream come true, to have somebody who he can kind of pick his brain and ask him all these questions. And AJ has wonderful stories and he's met these other writers and he's lived through some of these experiences. But he also says to John Boy that the way to really be a writer is to cut all ties with family and go out and be willing to sacrifice everything to find that big story. This creates a conflict for John Boy, who's very close to his family, but he admires and respects AJ. AJ's a huge help. He's this jack of all trades and he's lived so many experiences. So John Boy really takes this to heart and it creates a problem there. And along the way, as much as he is engaged with AJ in trying to take steps forward as a writer, he also creates a problem for the family because they get sidetracked on the writing and do not get the lumber cut, and things get behind on the contract, and AJ recommends something to speed up the sawmill, which ends up burning it out, and so they lose this contract. AJ ultimately does redeem himself with all the family because he helps to diagnose Jim Bob's appendicitis. And then when he hears about the money problems, he actually gives money of his own to help the family. So AJ is definitely a character that embodies so many wonderful qualities. And he was, as a character, someone that really, really made a difference in the Waltons' lives in so many ways. When John Boy makes all these mistakes because of being so caught up in the writing and realizes how much he has disappointed his father and let the family down, he comes to the conclusion that he thinks the only thing he can do is give up his dream of being a writer because he can't betray his family in that way. He feels he can't let them down and just be so selfish as to only pursue his dream and only care about that. So he feels that his only choice is to give that up. And that's a huge moment in his life, even though that's not what comes to pass. For him to come to that conclusion was a very difficult one. And I know we all can face really tough choices in our lives, and they're never easy. John recognizes the impact that AJ has on John Boy as a young, impressionable boy who yearns for this life that AJ talks about, and he sees how that poses a bit of a threat to John Boy, not physically, but just the future and the direction that John Boy might go. And I think he at that moment recognizes that John Boy won't stay on the mountain, that he will go out and embrace this life and search for it, and that he is young and impressionable, and these moments are turning points in John Boy's life. And I think there's a touch of sadness there for John, knowing that things will not stay the same and that John Boy's future will not be on the mountain. Something caught my attention here because when John Boy and AJ go out to chop down lumber to bring back for them to be able to use at the sawmill, they head off in a wagon pulled by 2 mules. Now, interesting, I don't recall ever seeing that wagon and those mules again. When they come back, he says, oh, turn the mules out. But we only ever saw Blue. I don't remember ever seeing these 2 mules again. So something that kind of appeared for this one episode and then was never referred to again. When they have to stop for John Boy to pull a stone out of the hoof of the mule, AJ first sees the Tabor Cabin, and he is very drawn to that. He ends up going into Ike's store to find out about it and planning to put a deposit on this place. He'd like to purchase it and perhaps even consider settling here. And this becomes a storyline throughout this episode and later is referred back to when the character of AJ returns in the episode, The Abdication. This cabin was shot on the back lot of the studio in both cases when we saw it, both in this episode and the future episode. In the final narration of this episode, they say that AJ passed through their lives and they never saw him again. Obviously, at that point in time, they did not know they were going to bring the character back in another episode. So goes to show that they're only planning ahead to a certain degree, and later obviously thought that it would be a great character to bring back, which indeed it was. Another case of beautifully written scenes. John gives John Boy really great life advice in this episode.
Man's judged by the way he's handling a job he's agreed to do. Give less than your best, whether you're writing or chopping wood or farming, and you're failing a lot of people. Most of all, he's failing himself. You do the best of what you try. You have nothing to be sorry about.
I'll try, Daddy.
In a subplot, Jim Bob is very sick, and as it turns out, ultimately he has appendicitis. AJ is hugely helpful in helping to diagnose or suggest that this is what it could be, and that if it is true that he needs medical attention and a hospital, immediately, and they do take him to the local hospital. At the hospital, we get our first introduction to Victor Isay, who later had a lovely long recurring role as Dr. Vance, and I always loved working with Victor. We had a lot of great scenes together, and he was such a gem. In the end, recognizing John Boy's connection to his family and that he has inadvertently driven a wedge there in terms of John Boy's conflict about wanting to be a writer but needing to be with his family and his willingness to give that up to help his family, then AJ confesses that his advice wasn't good, that he, in a sense, has used the chasing a story to avoid ever actually writing, and that in a sense he's never really written, and this big story he's chasing isn't necessarily the answer, that perhaps all these small stories become the one big story. And I think that's very prophetic, because in a sense that's what happened with Earl Hamner. He wrote about what he knew, he wrote about his family, and all those little stories from his childhood became this big story that became the Waltons, and look at the legacy he created for himself and for all of us. So I will be eternally grateful to all those little stories. That's what I have for you for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons about the literary man. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.